Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel, Histories of Airliners. Today we're taking a trip down memory lane to explore the fascinating world of the Boeing 720. This iconic jetliner once filled in its service with many airlines, but it's been largely retired for commercial service for decades. But that doesn't mean it's gone extinct. In fact, there are still a number of Boeing 720s out there, both in museums and in more, shall we say, adventurous locations. Before we start our trip around the world to find the extant Boeing 720s, what do we really know about them? We can see the obvious resemblance to the precursor Boeing 707, which, while not starting the commercial jet age, made it successful. The Boeing 720 differed from the Boeing 707 in that it had a shorter fuselage and modified wings, which allowed it to excel at short-range trips using airfields and runways that were shorter than used by the Boeing 707s and its international contemporaries. Production started in 1959, with the last Boeing 720 finishing its career around 2010, an aircraft we will cover later. Let's start with the good news. There are several Boeing 720s that have been lovingly and not so lovingly preserved in museums around the world. These aircraft offer a unique opportunity to step back in time and experience the glamour of air travel in the 1960s. We begin our journey, like the past few museum videos, in North America, where we find two examples of Boeing 720s in museums. First, we travel to Trenton, Ontario, Canada. Specifically, we start at the National Air Force Museum of Canada, where we find a strange-looking Boeing 720 displayed outside. The beginning of this aircraft story starts in early 1961 with American Airlines wearing the Astrojet livery and named Flagship Idaho. After a decade of service, this aircraft went to Middle East Airlines out of Beirut, Lebanon, and served the Middle Eastern market for 14 years, before going into storage in Stansted Airport, England, from 1985 to 1986. In early 1986, the aircraft was picked up not to fly passengers, to become an engine testbed for Pratt & Whitney Canada. An outsized nose was placed on these unique aircraft to test propeller and turboprop engines. Large turbofans could be tested by replacing the inner engine on the right wing with the engine to be tested. Also, small turbofans could be tested by being applied directly to the fuselage on the right-hand side. This aircraft was finally retired in the middle of 2010, and by 2012 was placed on outdoor display at the aforementioned National Air Force Museum of Canada, where it sits to this day in 2024. Our next stop is to the American Desert Southwest. Here at the Pima Air and Space Museum, we find the cockpit section of a Boeing 720 inside the main hall of the museum. This aircraft started its paying career with Western Airlines in the middle of 1961, where it would serve with this same airline until 1977. Air Malta picked up this aircraft to serve the Mediterranean market in 1978, where it would serve with them for just 1 month short of a decade. After this, the aircraft was initially stored at the Penal Airport until it eventually made its way to the Tucson Boneyard, where it was picked apart for KC-135 parts, and the cockpit section was salvaged for display inside the Pima Air and Space Museum, where it still allows visitors to sit in the pilot seats today. We now travel to Europe to find the remnant of only one Boeing 720 in existence on that continent. This lone surviving aircraft in Europe, and I put that word surviving in quotation marks, stands at the entrance of the Shannon, Ireland International Airport. This aircraft, like the first aircraft we reviewed for North America, had very similar careers, starting with American Airlines in early 1961 with the Astrojet livery. This airplane would transition to Middle East Airlines out of Lebanon in 1970 for a career that spanned just over 2 decades with this airline. This airliner was eventually stored at the Shannon International Airport and purchased by a company called Omega Air, which ended up stripping the aircraft for parts. The vertical stabilizer section was saved and given a sporty paint job and put on display in a decorative water display area at the entrance to the Shannon International Airport. We have 3 Boeing 720s on the ground and on display in Asia, with 2 of them on display in Pakistan alone. The first aircraft we will visit in Asia is currently on display indoors at the Gangshan Aviation Education Exhibition Hall next to the Republic of China Air Force Academy grounds. This aircraft spent the preponderance of its civilian career with Northwest Airlines starting in the middle of 1961. A British company called Temp Air International Airlines would lease the aircraft in 1971 to operate this aircraft on charter journeys in and around Europe. However, this would only last a few months, as in December of that same year, the aircraft would be purchased by the Republic of China Air Force. This aircraft would fly as a VIP transport for the Taiwan Air Force until 1984, when it was withdrawn from service. Initially, this aircraft was placed on outdoor display at the Republic of China Air Force Museum before being transferred at a later date to be displayed indoors at the Gangshan Aviation Education Exhibition Hall that was mentioned earlier. The next two aircraft can be talked about together since their individual careers very closely mirrored one another. They both started with Western Airlines in 1964, where they served the North American market for a decade. Both aircraft were acquired by Pakistan Airlines within a month of each other in 1974. The first aircraft was retired from service in late 1985 and placed on outdoor display at the Pakistan Airlines Planetarium in Karachi, Pakistan. The second aircraft left paying passenger service in September of 1986 and was placed on display at the Pakistan Airlines Planetarium in Lahore, Pakistan. Both aircraft show signs of wear and tear from being displayed outdoors, but we have found no information that either will be retired anytime soon. Before I leave this section of the video, some of you may be wondering why I did not include the Aviaca 720 at the Museo de los Niños in Bogota, Colombia. Even if you look at Google Street View, you can see it's still there. However, the above view on Google Maps and my current information state and show that this aircraft was broken up in place in 2018. These are the few museums that have Boeing 720s on display. If you're ever in the vicinity of one of these museums, I highly recommend checking it out. You won't be disappointed. While not on museum display, the following aircraft should be mentioned as they can be seen by the general public. Our first derelict aircraft can be found, if you know where to look, at the Israeli Air Force Museum at the Hatzerim Air Base. Of all our derelict aircraft presented here, it had the most diverse career. Starting in 1960, this aircraft, like others on our list, started with American Airlines wearing the Astrojet livery and named Flagship Mississippi. After 14 years with American Airlines, this aircraft spent most of the 1970s hopping from one airline to another. First it was with Somali Airlines for a year, then it flew for Dida Linhas Aéreas Mozambique, which unfortunately we can't find any photos for just the few months of service. Then on to Cyprus Airways for 1 year's service. After that it bounced to and from Monarch Airlines, while also serving with Air Ceylon and a quick return to Cyprus Airways. By the early 1980s, the airliner had finally landed, if you'll excuse the pun, with the Israeli airline known as MAOF, which was a long-distance, low-cost airline that existed briefly in the 1980s. It was purchased by the Israeli Aircraft Industries Company, where it received external modifications of an extended nose, but what was done for it on the inside is unknown at this time. By 1999, the aircraft was sitting abandoned at the Israeli Air Force Museum at the Hatzerim Air Base. Our next visit is to an aircraft with a very different career than most of the previous aircraft we've discussed. This airliner started its career with Eastern Airlines in 1961. After nearly a decade of flying Eastern U.S. and Caribbean routes, the aircraft winged its way to Scandinavia and flew for a company called Conair of Scandinavia for 11 years. After this, changes in ownership get a bit quicker. From 1981, Independent Air, which soon became Atlantis Skylarks, operated the aircraft as a charter aircraft for vacationers to resort destinations. By 1986, the aircraft was owned by a single group called Eagle International Ministries. I imagine that's a church group that used the aircraft for far-flung travels for its purposes of its chosen ministry. Come 1991, and a company called Continental Aviation had purchased the aircraft. This company has no known connection to the old Continental Airlines that existed at the time. This aircraft sits retired at the International Airport near Nagpur, India. Final aircraft on our tour sits abandoned near the Quetzalcoatl International Airport in Nuevo Laredo in Tamaulipas, Mexico. United Airlines took initial delivery of this airliner in 1961. This aircraft's career with United would last about as long as it did with most companies that took delivery of brand new Boeing 720s. A company called Teal Industries would purchase the aircraft in 1973 and lease it to Aero America, a charter airline, in 1975. From there, it would be leased to McCullough International Airlines, which used the aircraft to fly potential land purchasers to airports near sites that were up for sale. The aircraft was returned to Teal Industries from its lease in 1976 would then be purchased by a company called Argo Air International, which was just another aircraft leasing company. The aircraft was leased and then purchased by the Dominican-based Aeromar Líneas Aéreas Dominicanas, starting with the lease in 1979 and then an outright purchase in 1983. It was then returned to Argo Air International for future operations in 1984, but it wasn't until 1992 that the aircraft was purchased by a company called Lambda Air. Rumors state that this aircraft was involved in a drug trafficking deal that went wrong, as the event was interrupted by the Mexican Federal Police. Since then, it's been derelict at the Quetzalcoatl International Airport. Exploring these derelict Boeing 720s is a great way to get off the beaten path and see a bit of aviation history up close. However, it's important to be aware that these aircraft are often located on private property and may be dangerous to approach. Always use caution and common sense if you're thinking about checking out one of these abandoned 720s. The Boeing 720 may be retired from commercial service, but it's still a fascinating aircraft with a rich history. Whether you're admiring it in a museum or spotting it in the middle of nowhere, there's no denying that the 720 is a true aviation icon. I hope you enjoyed this little trip down memory lane. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more aviation content. Thanks for watching. And that's all for today. I hope you learned something new about the Boeing 720. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And don't forget to check out my other videos on aviation history. Until next time, fly safe.